Thanks so much for having us, Randy. So like Randy said, Dave and I are going to be talking about a snow squall event that we had across the state of Colorado. This was on December 22nd, 2020, and it was actually the most pronounced snow squall day in Colorado since the inception of the snow squall warning. So we're just going to show you guys some cool loops and talk about the forecast and some lessons learned. So first up, looking at the forecast. So with the system, we had a Pacific trough that brought a cold front across the northern Rockies. Ahead of this system, we had well above normal temperatures. We even had some rain falling in the higher valleys of western Colorado, including Eagle and Gunnison, Colorado. And ahead of this event with the cold front, we had numerous winter weather advisories in effect for the northern Colorado mountains and drifting down into west central Colorado. And those were in effect for several days. And with this event, we were advertising winds gusting to 45 miles an hour. We were anticipating blowing and drifting snow, as well as poor visibility from those. Some other details that we mentioned in our highlight were the details for when the heaviest snow was expected to be falling during the evening hours. We wanted to give a heads up for the ski traffic and commutes during the from work. And we also wanted to highlight that travel was going to be impacted due to blowing snow over the mountain passes. So again, there's just a picture showing our highlights and then the projected snowfall totals. So next up, we have just a snippet from the Grand Junction forecast discussion the morning of the event. And if you took a look at Boulder's, it was very similar. So again, we just wanted to highlight when the heaviest snow was expected, again, right around ski traffic. And we advertised that since it was so warm ahead of this system, we were expecting some flash freezing potential as the cold front was going to be moving through. We discussed the areas of blowing and drifting snow, again, at the pass level, and when we were expecting, again, that biggest impact to travelers. And then finally, we mentioned that there was the likelihood that we might need to issue the snow squall warnings because of the potential for banding from all that instability. So taking a look at the ingredients, since everyone's, I'm sure, aware of at this time, we have our snow squall parameter that we can look at. So that's something that we utilize very well during this event. So this is available on SPC's Meso analysis page as well as the CHIPS page. And we also just pulled up the forecast for 0Z during this particular event. So there's just a screenshot of it. So again, the snow squall parameter just takes into effect that potential for instability, sufficient moisture, and having those strong winds that can help support that snow squall development. And that's just a quick run through of, again, what's taken into account. So what we had that day, so across the region, we were experiencing or forecasting instability in the 50 to 100 joules per kilogram of surface-based CATE. We had an abundance of moisture. For Grand Junction sounding, our average is about 0.25 inches for PWatt for that time of year, and we were running 1 to 2 sigma above normal. Again, on that sounding, you can see a well-saturated profile. This is for up in the Steamboat Springs area, so up in northwest Colorado. And in addition to that well-saturated profile, we had winds of about 45 knots at 700 millibars on that sounding. Looking at the snow squall parameter, and also that's taking a look in the bottom left at frontogenesis potential. We had strong indications of that during that time period along the cold front. And then finally, we had a strong polar advection that was going to be moving in with the cold front and that potential for that flash freezing. So we had a lot of ingredients in play, and it was looking really good across the state of Colorado. And this is an example of the winter weather advisory that we had from Boulder's area. So in the highlight, they talked about snow being expected, the total accumulations, but then you can see highlighted the winds gusting as high as 65 miles per hour. Highlighted the regions, the time frame, and then also in the impacts tag, noting that travel could be very difficult and the widespread blowing snow could significantly reduce visibility. And talking about, again, that commute and that the roads could become slick and hazardous. One thing that we also are recommending after this event is using the headline tag with these highlights to highlight the rare event and the potential for snow squalls. And I'll pass it over to Dave to talk about some messaging now.
Okay, thank you, Megan, for that introduction on the meteorology behind it. And as just as important as the meteorology, or more important, actually, I should say, is actually the messaging of the meteorology and the end result, and what we can expect with regard to impacts. So one great thing about this particular event, and many events as we work through here, is that this was such a strong collaborative effort between the surrounding offices. So recognizing that potential that Megan talked about, and that we wrote about in the forecast discussion around that 11:30 time, there was a nice collaboration message that was sent to our surrounding offices that would be impacted most strongly from this potential snow squall event, to Grand Junction and Cheyenne. And really that allows us, to agree upon that the potential was increasing across the northern Colorado and even southern Wyoming, and that we were able to also at the same time provide that coordinated message between these offices. So allowing that discussion, that open discussion, when we talk about when we talk about putting the pieces of an event together, and we talk about the ability to discuss this between the offices, we're much more able to take advantage of perhaps grabbing a subject matter expert in this. One of us isn't always going to be the strongest person in winter weather forecasting and winter ops or the severe weather ops. That might be your specialty instead. Maybe it's fire weather, maybe it's marine, whatever the thing. When we start to put more people into this, think of that severe weather mesoanalysis group that we have for Central Region. When we start to, look into an event like this, a winter event, we may not have that subject matter expert at our local office that's on the desk at the time. So if we can grab as many people as we can, bring them to the party, let them, get all of those ingredients that Megan talked about, and say, hey, this really looks like a great day for a snow squall and widespread snow squalls. I think this is a really big advantage of improving that coordination between the offices. So based on that, shortly after getting all the experts involved, we created some social media posts for that. We sent out an NWS chat notice, and one of them was actually to our biggest outlet. While the Weather Service has some outreach to the public, it's certainly the highest level of outreach that we can get is when we draw in our media partners to bring that message to the table. We also then made local contact to our Department of Transportation as well. Moving forward, so talking about the messages, you're going to see Grand Junction here message on the left, the Boulder one on the right for just one of our social media posts. Two distinct looks, obviously, but really really the same exact message. So for example, we're looking on the left side, hazardous travel, mountains near and along I-70 through the afternoon. We both mentioned here 4 to 7 p.m. here on the Grand Junction side. A heads up for mountain travelers, mountain snow squalls 4 to 7 p.m. Associated with and then bringing in and drawing in some of these in winter infographics as well, which are quite useful. So we took advantage of those some of those pre-made infographics, and that really helped us out. Certainly an action item if your local social media team can set something up for you with regard to a snow squall event. Then with regard to other methods of messaging, now to our more toward our core partners. So in NWS chat, we certainly wanted to bring that out. So we were mindful of the news time. We tried to get this out here by right by the noon, before the noon weather segment, which we were able to do that time, talking about the details of that, again, that 4 to 7 p.m. And then also doing the same thing with the Department of Transportation, in this case, CDOT for Colorado Department of Transportation, talking about, the main time for those, 5 to 7 p.m. for particular for those areas, for up into our forecast area. And talking about, hey, you can maybe message us on your travel boards. And that, yes, he was indeed very appreciative of the heads up for that. So a lot of things we can do there to get that message out to the people that really need it. And what about maybe contacting some other methods that we have out there? Maybe you guys do web EOC, maybe contact the State Patrol. What does it look like for the State Patrol operations? Are they going to need, more troopers on the road, less troopers on the road? What does it look like for their workload, for their awareness of what would be to come for their workload here in the next, maybe 4 or 5 hours? So really, really thinking about all sorts of end users out there. All right, with that, I will throw it over to Megan, and she can talk about the actual event.
All right, thanks, Dave. So here is just a quick loop showing every 3 hours, showing the progression of the cold front. So you can see it started moving in to northwest Colorado early in the day and just quickly progressed across the region. So with it again, we were expecting that significant cold air advection pushing through. And we had that warm conditions out ahead of it, so rain falling on those higher elevations before everything switched over to snow with that cold front. So again, you can just see it quickly impacting the whole region. So it was a pretty widespread event. And next up, we have a loop showing the reflectivity along with our snow squall warnings overlaid with it. So this is just from the Grand Junction radar. So you'll see like a little switch when we had to go to a higher tilt to get to the other side of the mountains. But either way, you can show the progression of the most organized snow squalls. So we had a total of 15 snow squall warnings that day for Colorado. We had 9 in the Grand Junction forecast area, 6 in the Boulder area, and 3 in Pueblo's area. And one thing just really wanted to note is that we had really great coordination across the CWA line. So you can see pretty much as soon as one dropped off in Grand Junction's area, then Boulder or Pueblo was able to pick it up right there. We really heavily utilized collaboration on AWIP, so everyone was on the same page, and it was pretty much a seamless message in terms of getting those highlights out. So again, this is a very pronounced day across the area. And next up, this is just another radar loop, just showing the returns themselves. This is able to better see what happened once we switched to the other side of the mountains. So that's always a fun challenge, doing these kind of winter events with dealing with the terrain challenges that we have out here. But either way, you can still see the stronger bands showing up on radar.
And one thing was interesting too, Megan, I'll add in here too, is that you can see maybe ahead of the main frontal band, we had actually a few snow squalls out in front of that across Boulder's area. So it wasn't all with the front, as you see so organized here, but we had those earlier showers that were really dumping snow and still had the strong winds with them, given the environmental flow in place.
So next up, just again, going more detail into the event itself. So we had, like Dave mentioned, those social media posts before the onset of the snow squalls. Again, those were issued from all our offices in coordination together. Like Dave mentioned, they also called their respective emergency managers for heads up notifications. They called in that additional forecaster, which I believe was Dave, who came from shifted from telework to help out in the office. And it was a really great job of just recognizing the need for someone else to come into the office before it was too late. And then on Grand Junction's side, we ended up having the day shift stay late to help out watching aviation, because a lot of these snow squalls did go through several of our TAF sites. So that was another fun challenge. So then we have moving into some pictures and some webcam images. So this is from the Craig, Colorado webcam. So that's again up in northwest Colorado. So you can see just a wall of snow showing the squall approaching the airport. And then you can see on the right what it looked like when the squall was moving through. Taking a look at the observations itself from the airport. So even though it never quite dropped down to a quarter-mile visibility from that image and everything else, we still had gusts going up to 47 miles an hour at the Craig Airport. And we did drop down to half-mile visibility. But either way, I think this is just a good reminder that sometimes the observations, we can't rely completely on them. We have to use all these other things in our toolkit to help figure out what's going on. So either way, very impressive for a long duration. Next up, we have the Steamboat Springs area. So this was captured, someone who's in Steamboat. you can just see the snow squall approaching the area. So pretty impressive that someone was able to capture this. And then we have another video also from the Steamboat Springs area.
Let me get to it. Sorry.
Okay. And this was well shared on social media. So you can see just completely encompassing the region. You can also see in this video some evidence of the lightning. And the one thing to know about the Steamboat Springs area, it is very highly trafficked in the winter season. It's a big ski resort, so a lot of people were impacted by this event. So that's one of the local considerations that we all know our local areas. So taking into account that extra impact from the ski season and the influx of travelers. So it was just amazing, again, that someone was able to capture this video. So taking a look at the observations from the Steamboat Springs Airport, they did actually drop down to a 1/4 mile visibility, and they ended up having winds gusting to 45 miles an hour. And then another prominent site, we have the Aspen Airport, again, big ski season destination. So they had several similar conditions at several times during, they had similar conditions at several sites, including Aspen across the region that day. So basically widespread snow squalls for much of northern Colorado and basically along and north of I-70. So again, Aspen Airport, you can see numerous occurrences of a 1/4 mile visibility. We ended up having that heavy snow and winds gusting to 40, 45 miles an hour. So quite impressive. And now I'll pass it back over to Dave to talk about what Boulder experienced.
Yeah, I'll just talk about a few snow squall warnings. Again, we issued 6 of them total in our forecast area on this particular day. The first one was for that prefrontal convective shower that we had up by Cameron Pass. So this is in the northern front range of Colorado. It's a pretty small area. As you can see, the warning was for a really tiny postage stamp area here. In fact, if you can see on your screen here, the population, 0. That said, it's still a mountain pass, but this kind of led to some discussion internally after the event. Is this a best practice that we issue it for, perhaps a very small mountain pass? It is exposed to wind above timberline, but at the same time, it's relatively low traveled and the speeds aren't that high. So latest snow squall guidance that we received last year, would be a no, let's not do that. You can see the auto tweet here was pretty much useless. I have to say that. There's no geographic description. In fact, it's such a small area, you can't even tell. People were asking us, where the heck is this for? And in fact, the auto tweet stated, a snow squall warning is in effect until 4:45 p.m. for period. So there were absolutely no landmarks, and it didn't even pick up on the Cameron Pass area. So one of our best practices spilled out of that, which we followed that up with, knowing that was a shortcoming, was we went here to Graph IDSS. We had our snow squall warnings plotted on here, put the radar on there and say, hey, this is the area where you're going to expect. It's Route 14, Cameron Pass, near zero visibility with that snow squall. So just a best practice that followed out of that. Moving on, next one was for the I-70 corridor. Again, this was another convective shower ahead of the main frontal band where we had winds gusting to about 50 miles an hour. But again, this is a really heavy travel corridor for us, especially during the winter season with ski traffic. Our third one was up again back near Grand Junction now, or Grand Junction's forecast area. So now we're going to go with the main snow squall area with the frontal band. We had widespread gusts, 50 to 60 miles per hour, definitely a classic snow squall. And there was, like Megan suggested earlier, there's really good collaboration between the two. It's like, we were watching the cams, they were chatting with us, we were chatting back and forth. Just a really excellent best practice that we had was, let's make this a continuous thing across our forecast area boundaries. So it worked really well. Then our next one was just a continuation of that one in the more rural area of way up in the mountain areas here. Pretty, you know, there's not a whole lot up here, although we did get word back from the highways that said it was the worst driving weather somebody had ever experienced up there. Moving more toward the I-70 corridor, again, now this is a continuation. You can see again the collaboration with Grand Junction's warning over here. Ours is to the east, well ahead of the snow squall, trying to get that message out as far in advance as possible. Really well-defined corridor. In fact, we had gusts all the way up to as high as 62 miles per hour in the Vail, up around the Vail corridor, which is right just west of Vail Pass here. So we're up in, again, those ski areas, and really high impacts expected with near zero visibility, blowing snow, heavy falling snow, and of course a flash freeze too, because as Megan said too, it was quite warm ahead of the advance, ahead of that front. So here's what it looked like as that snow squall moved through. Of course, these are cams, and you know, if you're a driver out there, that it's always about 10 times worse than the cams look. So we did have brief closures on I-70 from this particular one. Mostly those were due to slide offs. Thankfully, there are no major pileups. Hopefully we can credit a little bit of our messaging with the lack of traffic, relatively a lack of traffic that we saw on I-70. So perhaps that did play a role in that. We can only hope. We can only think that that was the case. And then finally, one for another snow squall warning. The last one that we issued, this was for the northern foothills, since it was such a well-pronounced snow squall moving in. It did include the northern portions of the I-25 corridor, so a heavily traveled high-speed corridor up here. This area is more prone to heavy snow and from the showers drifting off the mountains, whereas we purposely left out, as you can see here toward the upper right, the Fort Collins and Loveland areas, as these snow squalls do tend to dissipate quite quickly as they come off the front range. And lo and behold, and we made clear that was the case here. So we collaborated this one with the Cheyenne Forecast Office, as they had snow squall warnings going across the border, including Cheyenne and the I-80 corridor up there. And we also clearly communicated that this was not for Fort Collins and Loveland by highlighting that in the tweet here. Again, this is not for a major metro area. And even though we had a few WIA alarms enacted for those cities, generally it was well received, and people understood that for the most part it was definitely to the north of those metro areas. So that really helped clear. Another best practice that it really helped quote tweeting these automated tweets to really clear the error and really get that message out that it does not include some areas as well, even though it was for those particular counties. So with that, I'll pass it on to a little bit of feedback now from some of those snow squall warnings.
So this is from one of the Grand Junction area's emergency managers from Eagle County, which is located right along Interstate 70. So we got great feedback, but it also brought up a good point about what we can do on our part to better get these messages across. So from a ground truth perspective, he said that he had reports of it sounded like a blizzard, or looked like a blizzard and sounded like a tornado, and they had at least 10 to 20 wrecks and slide offs up and down the Interstate I-70 corridor going towards Vail Pass. So that alone verified the impacts and that there was a snow squall. But as far as what we can do on our part, it did just kind of highlight that we can continue to further our education with the emergency management community regarding the issuance of snow squall warnings, especially when it's paired with a winter weather advisory that's already in effect. So he was suggesting that we have the snow squall warning out in effect for much longer, for several hours. And the snow squall warning is intended to be that short duration product regarding that high impact hazardous travel conditions during those peak travel times, especially in our area, what we locally have experienced. So we can just continue to educate them in terms of, you know, we have the winter weather advisory in effect that covers the broader range, longer duration impacts to travel. But then the snow squall warning was really just to highlight that 30 or so minute period where we had the greatest impacts and threats to travel. But either way, the EM did say that the warning was appropriate, informative, and timely.
All right, so we'll move through to a little bit of summary and some best additional subjects and some best practices. Of course, we talked about a few of those already. Really the additional subjects, and maybe you've had troubles in your forecast area. It was interesting at some point, we had during this particular event that we had the WIAs for Grand Junction, Boulders, and Cheyennes even, alerting all the way down into southeast Colorado, all the way down into the New Mexico border, in fact. Which was a little bit crazy. In fact, even Cheyenne was issuing those at like close to midnight, or actually past the midnight hour for their I-80 corridor, which we'll talk a little bit later here. But those even were alerting down there and waking people up. So it was a little bit crazy. Fortunately, most that has been solved. There's still a little bit of overshoot though with cell phones. You'll get this in the severe weather as well with cell phones that are not the WIA 3.0 compatible. For those location-specific warnings. We did do a follow-up with the ROC reports, and that can help a lot as well with regard to solving issues like that. So anytime that you have a situation like that, they can provide a follow-up and work on the situation, pass that up the chain. So if you can add screenshots or what carrier that cell phone was on, maybe the phone type, that can help diagnose any potential issues down the road. And finally, limit the coverage area as best as possible, like we did for the Fort Collins and Loveland area. If it's not going to impact them, be sure to keep them out of it, because you can only imagine what would happen if you send a WIA for 1 million people or so at a time. You can only imagine, and then you get a light snow shower. So that's the big consideration there. The auto tweets were good. They were real good from a time savers perspective, but boy, they can be missing a lot of generic, a lot of particular geographic or roadway information, such as the mountain passes. Provided feedback to that. We would love to see, and in the severe weather too, if we could add the hashtag to that with your state and WX behind that. That would be just a tremendous advantage, I think, to help spread that word more. The quote tweets we utilize quite effectively through this. And finally, we didn't mention the mesosector yet, but that is also really helpful. Kind of, again, like severe weather operations and having somebody always on the radar, somebody always looking at satellite. It's a good idea to have a mesosector request going to give us that time resolution, and that maybe that little bit of heads up, that 5 minutes ahead of time, where basically we can look at things 5-10 minutes ahead of time to see, hey, these clouds are growing here. We're going to have some severe convective snow squall through this area. Moving on to best practices, we've talked again a lot about these quite a bit, but the heads up to the media partners, of course, all of our core partners, especially the media too, to get that word out to the general public. The EMs and CDOT or Department of Transportation of your choice definitely is a big one, of course. You're building our trust and the relationship with that, because what happens the next time when they have a high impact event and they didn't hear anything. So anytime you can communicate with them, even if it's a low confidence, I think can certainly help that messaging potential. We had great collaboration with the surrounding offices, as we talked about. I think if you can draw in that, a subject matter expert on winter, or again applying this to any type of high impact weather, severe weather, fire weather, whatever, the more you can draw in that expertise from maybe a neighbor to the surrounding office, I think it just allows us to grow this message and the confidence perhaps of something happening or not happening so much better. Grand Junction, I think, had us really nice, I'm going to go here and share this. Their really nice snow squall page. They developed a warning specific or a snow squall specific snow squall page with the policy, of course, to start, some best practices. The policy over here is located as well. We have the forecast situational awareness. Really some nice stuff here, outreach materials, everything you wanted snow squall and more. Training, were case studies, event summaries. So I was like, oh, thank you, Megan, for doing that. I'm copying that and copy their page and plop that right into the Boulder one as well. So really, really nice feature. Again, as I think Megan talked a little bit about the staffing. If snow squalls are expected, you know, or possible, adjust that trigger chart and your ops level accordingly. So you may need, you know, maybe not just one extra person, but, you know, to watch the radar and do the warnings, but perhaps 2 or 3 if there's if phones are going to light up. You know, what happens if you end up with a WIA in a metro area and you have you know, 1 or 2 million people that are getting a snow squall warning? You can only imagine what your workload goes to at that point. Secondly, or finally here, we'll talk about a local snow squall policy. Always nice to have. For ours, in particular, for example, we talk about heavily traveled corridors. That's when we're going to issue ours. Not so much for other locations. This can be different for everybody, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. Every office might have their little specific criteria. Focus on the impacts, keep them as small, and you keep the warnings as small as possible. Only highlight those areas, you know, that are going to be impacted by a snow squall. Use them sparingly for the extreme events. And then some of the, you know, the latest guidance from last winter actually suggested outside of main travel corridors that we don't issue snow squall warnings at all. So interestingly enough, we did this presentation for the Rocky Mountain webinar in the springtime, and I wanted to open it up for discussion here a little bit. Does anybody think we overwarned by issuing 15 snow squall warnings in one particular event, or how would this particular event look in your forecast area?
Thanks, Dave and Megan. Let's open this up for discussion. If you have a response to Dave, either type it in the question pane or the chat, or raise your hand, and we can have a little discussion about what Dave was just asking about the number of snow squall warnings that they issued in this event. How are you all handling these events in your area?
And maybe I'll draw in a few other things here too. Do we need to issue a snow squall warning just because there's a snow squall shown on radar, but it's out in the middle of nowhere basically? What about your feelings of issuing a snow squall warning at midnight?
Well, Dave, while we're waiting for folks to chime in, one question I kind of had is, you know, with this introduction of the snow squall warnings, how challenging it is, and for you, Megan, as well, how challenging has it been in your offices to kind of come up with, you had the great webpage at Junction there in policy in Boulder, to kind of get everybody on the same page in these events, you know, how challenging has that been to kind of get everybody thinking along the same lines with respect to when to issue these and when not to?
I think it's been, I think we've done pretty well, and I think everyone just has kind of found new things that have helped them, and we've really been sharing it a lot internally in the office. Just in terms of one person noticed, you know, that, yeah, the Craig Airport might not have been actually reporting snow squall conditions, but looking at everything else, it definitely warranted a snow squall conditions. So yeah, I think everyone's just kind of, we've had a lot of people working these events, and a lot of people just kind of have learned things and shared things. So yeah, I think we've all been pretty good about being on the same page internally, for sure.
Okay, great.
I was just curious if there's anybody from the maybe Chicago or Northern Indiana or Southwest Lower Michigan that would be on here, would talk about I-80 94 considerations around Lake Michigan or anywhere else that would be prone to, you know, snow squalls off of Great Lakes.
Yeah, it'd be great to compare and contrast, huh? Dan Cobb says, too many winter storm warnings for passes given wind and snowfall for 6 hours. As EM feedback inferred would have been better. So I think he's saying, sorry, the way I read that didn't come across very well. I think he's saying too many snow squall warnings. The winter storm warning for the passes given the duration of the event may have been better.
Yeah, it ended up being, probably more, a higher number of snow squall warnings than we originally thought, I would say. A lot of times these would line up right along the front, and even then it was like, it was a difficult situation because we had the advisory out, for the snow and blowing snow, but then, we ended up with some snow squalls ahead of the main band, and then there's big gaps in it. So it was really only intense for about an hour in any one location at most. So it's actually less than that, probably like 30 minutes in most locations. So yeah, it's always a tricky thing, but I think we definitely had that consideration. It's like, are there too many snow squalls warnings that are going out here?
Yeah, another comment that came in was from Terry Simmons. They said, do not assume that no one travels at midnight. The travelers may be few, but they are still highly vulnerable. Any other thoughts? I can unmute you if you want to say something directly or type it into the questions pane. I can relay it.
Yeah, so I think Cheyenne issued some as late as midnight, actually maybe midnight to 1 a.m. For their truckers and specifically. So if you don't see any further questions, we can continue on with the new option, and we can talk about the IBW tags potentially coming to us pretty soon for helping maybe narrow down or at least limit the number of snow squall warnings if some people thought that was too many. So.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm not seeing any other questions or hands raised at this time, Dave and Megan.
Okay, we'll continue on though. So pretty much, what we found out in the Rocky Mountain webinar is that we had a lot of different policies, and that's great because we can. At the end of the day, you're the one that knows your partners better than anybody else. So what maybe works in your area may not work in another forecast area. Again, going to like our neighbor Cheyenne, their I-80 corridor, and this was like to talk, like I heard Terry Simmons talk about a little bit about northern Indiana. The travel numbers may be down, but for those truckers traveling during the overnights, high rates of speed, they might want that. They would want that information in front of them to say, hey, you're gonna hit snow squalls around the southern end of Lake Michigan here at at maybe 1 or 2 in the morning. So how can we convey that? And I think the Weather Service is actually looking forward to moving forward to that potential, as allowing for the broader use of snow squalls, but yet still giving that option to trigger the WIA for the most impactful snow squalls. So the NWS, I don't know how many of you have seen this, but they're actively soliciting comments for using IBW tags now for snow squalls. So it's just a little bit of an overview here of what those two options would be. One would be for the a general snow squall, which could be used, frequently when snow squall conditions are expected, with a reduction to the threat of safe travel. That would not activate the WIA. So a snow squall would be defined snow squall, but again, something less than, let's say, a life-threatening or a really, immediate threat to life. The other one then would be the significant tag used with snow squalls when a substantial threat to safe travel exists. And that one would activate the WIA. Now, again, this is only for comments. This is nowhere near policy yet. So just wanted to get that in. But there may be an option coming down the line here, perhaps in the next year or so, that would give us a little bit of more flexibility. And that might really be really nice to have for the flexibility between offices and what we need to do for each particular event. Even in the office for, let's say, a high traveled, high speed corridor, or maybe a lesser traveled, slightly lower speed highway or significant area. Would also then allow us to use snow squall warnings a lot more, or a little bit more frequently anyway, perhaps during the overnight hours as well. Just thoughts about that. All right, with that, I will throw it back to Megan and some for a few more summaries and best practices from her side.
Thanks, Dave. So yeah, just wrapping things up. So additionally, like we talked about that partner education, highlighting what the snow squall warning is intended for, those short duration events. And again, comparing that to our general winter weather advisories that we may have in effect. Talking to our local CWSU, our aviation partners to talk about any inputs regarding the TAF amendments, especially like I said, with this event, we had numerous TAF sites that were impacted by these highlights. So how to just make sure we factor that into our TAF forecast to make sure we support our aviation partners as well. As far as further DSS developments, like Dave mentioned, talking to your social media focal point or your local team and having these pre-made weather story templates or graphic cast templates. So we have an example that our social media focal point did in Grand Junction. And then you're fine. Yeah, so just highlighting the potential for snow squalls and also an example graphic cast showing the latest radar imagery and what the highlight is discussing. And then going on to, now that we have the DSS packet, this is just an example that was mocked up by Dave. So we haven't been able to use this yet during a snow squall event, so hopefully we'll be able to utilize this. But we did it with the SITREP this past winter, and that was well received. But yeah, with the DSS packet, we can have those quick targeted messages. We can disseminate this only to the affected counties, so those emergency managers, so they can easily distribute it to their partners and everyone can be on the same page and ready for what to expect. We can highlight the timing, the location, the impacts, and what our confidence level is. And the Boulder area, they actually did this during a March blizzard back earlier this year, and it was well received by the partners, especially when highlighting these high impact travel corridors. And then finally, this was just released off the street. We have the National Winter Program best practices documents that were just released. So this was a collaborative effort between regions. I know myself and someone, Rob Cox and Cheyenne, were on the team, as well as other people across the country. And the main thing was just to include, just give some best practices, because like Randy alluded to, this is still a newer product and we're still learning how to best utilize it and deliver the best message we can to our partners across the entire country. So with the best practices, you can see just from the various things, we've got some forecasting and situational awareness tools and tips. We have some meteorological and non-meteorological things to look out for, including traffic information, or such as antecedent road conditions and live traffic reports. We have examples of radar signatures, talking about warning theory, and also some messaging and reporting information, including before an event, during an event, and after an event. So there's a lot of information, so definitely encourage you all to take a look at everything that's included. Then something else that the team came out with was a workflow document, which is, yep, right there. So this is also included in the best practices. So this is just kind of used for helping an office decide when and what product to issue. So just going through that flow to see what would best be recommended based on the conditions that you're forecasting. And then finally, another thing that came out was the playbook. So again, just a playbook showing the forecasting tools and messaging resources, starting as far as 2 days in advance, 1 day prior to the event, throughout the event, and after the event has wrapped up, including notifying the local your ROC about all the impacts, issuing the LSRs, and also getting everything entered into storm data. So I think that was actually everything we had. So again, thank you for having us, and hopefully we can continue to evolve this program and share our lessons learned, and we can continue to help evolve the snow squall warning program.